I would just like to know a little bit about you, where you're from, your background in education, passions, anything like that.
All right. Well, I was born in North Carolina, born and raised there. I went to public school for only 3 years and then private school for the rest of my education in a Seventh-day Adventist community. Went to Fletcher Academy for high school in Fletcher, North Carolina. And at the time, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. So a lot has changed since then, as usual. And then I went to college at Southern Adventist University in lights of being a youth minister, chaplain. During my time at high school, I had a really good mentor. She was the chaplain, and that seemed like something I really wanted to do. But after a while, didn't really feel like it was my calling. So I switched my major from theology to religious studies with a psych minor. And that's what I graduated with. And then I heard that I could pursue some of the things that I wanted to do through social work. And one of those things was to counsel, mainly relationship counseling. And I'm really big on relationships and communication, like all sorts of kind of relationships. So that's what I went into social work wanting to do, getting my master's at Southern. And now, the second year, I'm really interested in policy. So there's some things I want to do. I want to help lobby for certain bills. We had a lobbyist from the Women's Fund, a nonprofit organization, come in and talk about the bills that she fights for. And we had a long discussion. It seemed like something I really wanted to do and still want to do.
Thank you for sharing. I had no idea, obviously, up until this interview that you had that background in religious studies. That's very cool. Do you think that's been able to help you in your move towards social work?
Yes, it really does. I think one thing that religious studies, like in my religious classes, and especially at Southern, you're kind of in this Adventist bubble. I kind of saw some gaps where in my understanding of the Bible that we were supposed to tend to people in the church and understand, I saw some gaps in the church. And it also helps, I think, me approach people in a Christ-like way as much as I possibly can. And I realize that that definition is different for others. I have my definition. But yeah, I do think that it helps me as well as my psych background, as well my minor.
I think that's really great. When you made that shift from what you'd been studying for quite some time into getting interested in policy, what made you be interested in that in the first place?
Well, I had already kind of been interested in some of that lifestyle. I've been kind of limited in some of the things that I can do due to financial issues and stuff like that. So when I was Southern, which is a very expensive college, I was just kind of limited to the time I could. And there was a point in my education that I left Southern after my first semester. I had to leave due to financial issues. And I went to a community college for a year. And I took business law. And I absolutely loved that class. Not really as much as the business part, but the law part was just so fascinating, and how it all worked, and different changes, and how those changes. We were taught by a lawyer who was actually practicing law in Tennessee. So we did online classes, and it was just extremely fascinating. I did that, but then I went back to Southern in hopes to pursue theology again. And so that's what I was on the track to. And then, as you know, I moved from that, religious studies, and then social work. And so I'd kind of put the policy work behind me, though I was still interested in law, though I didn't know how I could possibly pursue it. But then the second semester of my first year in the master's program, we had policy and social welfare was one of the classes, and I read one chapter and I was like, this is something that I want to do. Like instantly, I was like, this is something I want to do. This is where I want to help people, and this is how I want to kind of get things done on a small scale and a grand scale. I feel like policy work does both. Something I enjoy about it.
I completely feel the same way. Up until when I started working with Unified, I had no idea the impact that policy had on my life as a student. But after dealing with it, I have seen, what differences it can make, whether it's strong or very weak. I want to switch gears for a second because you are a student. You're just not a high school student. Yeah. So how has this pandemic affected your learning style?
Well, okay, so in the master's program at Southern, we have class every other Sunday. So we only meet once every other week, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So, and it's pretty exhausting going through a lot of material and classes, and it's constant work. But once it shifted over to where we were meeting via Zoom, I feel like it really put a limit and burden to my ability to learn. I'm an extrovert personally. I love people. And to have that experience with people, sometimes limited via chat, is what gives me energy and what gives me motivation. So personally, my motivation and ability to properly seek education has probably dimmed due to the coronavirus and kind of being stuck at home and forced to move back home when I was in Tennessee. So yeah, it's definitely put a damper on my educational experience.
Going along with that, do you think your grades have been affected in any way? Your education in general, anything like that?
Yes, definitely. I would say I just kind of lost some motivation since I was stuck by myself, trying to pursue education. It really, I would say that my grades suffered some. Instead of getting that 4.0 that I wanted, I didn't get that. And I kind of told myself, in my personal situation, there are certain requirements, the required GPA you have to have to continue the master's program, and I still had that. So I kind of took light in that and was just like, okay, I'm still able to move forward, which is good.
I definitely think during this time, it's so easy, especially if you are a student who shoots for that 4.0, for you to be really hard on yourself, even when you're in the middle of a pandemic. But I think, you focusing on the good and saying, hey, at least I'm meeting my requirements and everything like that. Maybe it's not what I was shooting for, but I was meeting my requirements. I feel like that's still a really good thing. Just being more gentle with yourself, I definitely think is something we all need to do anyways.